It was meant to be a quiet drive home. Judge Terrence Malcolm Everett had just wrapped a grueling 3-day legal conference in Topeka, Kansas. He wasn't in his judge's robe or courtroom loafers. Instead, he wore a gray polo, jeans, and a pair of old driving shoes that had molded to his feet over the years. Exhaustion shadowed his features, the kind that clings to a man whose life has been one long performance of perfection. As the sun began to dip westward, casting amber streaks across the highway, he pulled off at a modest rest stop near Coffeyville. A scattering of parked semis and a lone family finishing lunch were all that shared the stillness. Judge Everett just wanted to stretch his legs, breathe in something other than court protocol, and call his wife, Yvonne. Their conversation was light. Marcus, their son, got a B+ in calculus. Dinner could be leftovers or tie, it didn't matter. The world felt quiet. Familiar. Then came the white pickup. Sheriff's markings. A cruiser followed, lights off. At first, Everett didn't react. Law enforcement was his world. He nodded politely at the approaching deputies. One, tall with sunburnt skin and reddish hair. The other, broad-shouldered with a heavy mustache. Neither nodded back. Their eyes didn't just look at him, they scanned him, measured him. "You mind hanging up the phone, sir?" the tall one asked, hand on his belt. "May I ask what this is about?" Everett replied, the calm of decades in court still in his voice. "We got a report about a suspicious individual out here," said the stockier one. "You match the description." "Which is?" Everett inquired. "Black male. Alone. Near the trees. Might be high." He exhaled slowly, not angry, just tired. "Officers, I'm Judge Everett. I pulled over to take a call and stretch my legs. I can show you ID." He presented both his license and judicial badge. They didn't bother to look. "We still need you to place your hands on the hood," said the tall deputy. "Are you detaining me?" "Not detaining. Just making sure everything checks out." "That's not reasonable suspicion," Everett replied. "I've done nothing wrong." "You refusing to comply?" the deputy asked, voice rising. Everett remained calm. "I'm explaining that I know my rights." But that calm was met with force. His arms were seized, cuffed tightly behind him. His phone hit the ground, still on the call with Yvonne. One officer picked it up, saw her name, and ended the call without a word. Cut to, teen with camera. A 15-year-old boy, Jalen, sitting in an SUV at the far end of the lot, had been filming quietly. His mother, distracted by her phone, didn't notice at first. Jalen captured everything, Everett calmly identifying himself, the cuffs, the smirk on the deputies' faces. Inside the cruiser, Everett sat stiffly. Brent Callahan stood nearby with crossed arms. Dustin McGra was still checking his ID. "Deputy Callahan," Everett said. "I haven't been read my rights. I haven't been informed of any crime. Judges don't get special treatment," Callahan barked. "You could be the governor. Still gotta follow orders." "I did. I told you who I was. I showed you my ID. You chose to ignore it." "Dispatch isn't finding anything on this guy," McGra muttered. "Run it again," Callahan snapped. "Or maybe," Everett interjected, "you're just uncomfortable with the idea that a black man in a polo shirt has more authority than you." McGra shifted. For the first time, discomfort crossed his face. Cut to, trooper arrival. The high-pitched wail of a siren. A Kansas state trooper, tall and brown-skinned, pulled into the lot. One glance at Everett and he froze. "Judge Everett?" Everett nodded. "Release him. Now." Callahan blinked. "You know this guy?" "That's Judge Terrence Everett. Federal Circuit Court. Keynote speaker yesterday." Silence. Then fumbling hands. The cuffs were removed. Still, no apology. Back in his car, Everett rubbed his wrists. His phone buzzed with voicemails, including one from an unknown number. "My son recorded what happened," the message said. "I thought you should have a copy." The video arrived. Clear. Unforgiving. The internet did the rest. By midnight, 500,000 views. Caption: "When a judge gets treated like just another black man." Cut to courthouse, next day. Sebastian County Courthouse. Packed. 8:45 a.m. Callahan and McGra entered in suits. No uniforms. No badges. "Who's the judge?" Callahan asked. "Circuit court guy." "No clue," McGra replied. "All rise." Judge Everett entered. Robed. Composed. Callahan blinked. McGra looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. Judge Everett sat behind the bench. Deputy Brent Callahan. Deputy Dustin McGra. "You are here under internal review." The deputies didn't object. Couldn't. "Clerk, play the video." The courtroom watched, the stop, the cuffs, the silence. No shouting. Just systemic bias caught in 1080p. "Would either of you like to explain before we proceed?" Everett asked. Callahan stammered. "We acted on dispatch." It escalated quickly. "You didn't recognize me?" "No, sir." "Do you require recognition before offering respect?" McGra, "We've had issues in that area." "We didn't mean offense." "I don't want an apology for not recognizing me as a judge," Everett said. "I want an answer for why my skin and presence made you assume threat." The room stayed still. "Justice doesn't care about your badge. It cares about the truth." Everett recommended suspension and referred them for civil review. "You're lucky I'm a judge," he said. "If I were anyone else, this might have ended differently." Cut to aftermath. Headlines erupted. News cycles churned. Some defended the deputies. Others saw what they'd always known: it doesn't matter what you wear. To some, you'll only ever be a threat. Everett declined all interviews. No talk shows. No profiles. But in court, he returned one last time. "No cameras allowed." "I forgive you," he said, "not for you, but for me. Because your actions don't define me. And they never will." He banged the gavel once. Court adjourned. As he folded his robe and walked past the men who had cuffed him, he didn't need to say anything else. Because justice had already spoken. To be continued. Flashback, 1994. Terrence Everett, fresh out of law school, walked into his first courtroom as a public defender in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He was 26, the youngest attorney in the county, and the only black one. The courtroom had felt hostile, not in words but in glances, mutters, the way the bailiff hesitated to show him respect. His first client was a teenager accused of stealing a stereo. Everett saw himself in the boy: same skin, same suspicion, same weight of proving you belonged. That moment cemented his vow, to know the law so well no one could dismiss him. That vow became a foundation. Over the years, he built a reputation as fair but unshakable, a man who didn't raise his voice to be heard, because the force of his logic carried more weight than volume ever could. Now, after the viral video, his story echoed far beyond Arkansas. Community centers in Little Rock held discussions. Churches brought up the incident in sermons. A group of law students launched a campaign for state law enforcement reform, citing the Everett Doctrine, a proposed model for handling civilian interactions without racial profiling. In every interview request he declined, in every speech he chose not to give, Judge Everett made one thing clear: this wasn't about fame. It was about facing the mirror. And making sure the system did too. Next, the ripple effect. How Judge Everett's quiet defiance shook institutions from police precincts to law schools across the South. Now, after the viral video, his story echoed far beyond Arkansas. Community centers in Little Rock held discussions. Churches brought up the incident in sermons. A group of law students launched a campaign for state law enforcement reform, citing the Everett Doctrine, a proposed model for handling civilian interactions without racial profiling. In every interview request he declined, in every speech he chose not to give, Judge Everett made one thing clear: this wasn't about fame. It was about facing the mirror. And making sure the system did too. The ripple effect was immediate and profound. In statehouses across the South, lawmakers who had previously sidestepped conversations about racial profiling found themselves flooded with calls and emails. Community leaders in Jackson, Memphis, and Montgomery began citing the Everett Standard in town halls. A bill proposing mandatory racial bias training for law enforcement officers was reintroduced in Arkansas's General Assembly with bipartisan support. This time, it actually passed committee. At the University of Arkansas School of Law, a new elective filled up within 24 hours: Power, Perception, and the Judiciary. Its first guest lecturer, Judge Everett, who reluctantly accepted, not to talk about the video, but to walk students through the constitutional threads that had been violated, and what justice could look like when dignity wasn't optional. Police precincts quietly began internal reviews. In Little Rock, the police chief issued a new department-wide protocol for stops at public rest areas. The policy was clear: no detainment without documented probable cause. In Coffeyville, the sheriff's office released a formal apology, not just to Judge Everett, but to the public. It was posted on their website for transparency. Meanwhile, in churches, barbershops, classrooms, and community centers, people discussed something more personal. They talked about how they'd felt watching the video, not as spectators, but as participants in a shared history. Stories poured out. That could have been my father. I went through the same thing outside Texarkana last year. Now my son wants to go to law school. And Judge Everett? He stayed quiet publicly, but privately, he kept writing. He drafted a blueprint for a state judicial equity board, a new body to oversee bias complaints not just against cops, but prosecutors and judges, too. He shared it quietly with 3 other circuit judges. All 3 signed on. Because for him, the lesson wasn't about going viral. It was about going forward. Next, the final test: Judge Everett is offered a national spotlight but must decide between staying in the courtroom or stepping onto the political stage. It was a Thursday morning when Judge Everett received it. The White House Office of Public Engagement. They wanted him to speak at a national summit on judicial reform. The president would be there. So would the Attorney General. Everett was stunned, but not entirely surprised. The video, the hearings, the public response. It had all coalesced into something larger than any one man. His name was now part of a national conversation. His wife Yvonne listened quietly as he told her about the invitation over breakfast. "It's an honor," she said, stirring her tea. "But it's also a decision. Because once you step onto that stage, you can't go back to being anonymous." "Not really." He nodded slowly. She was right. The robe had always been a shield, not from criticism, but from spectacle. From distraction. Becoming a symbol was never his goal. But symbols had a way of outgrowing the people they came from. Later that day, he received a second call, this one from a grassroots organization based in Atlanta. They wanted him to consider running for state attorney general. "Your story could inspire real change," the organizer said. "Not just in courts, but in policy. In power." That night, Judge Everett sat alone in his study. On the desk were 2 things. His original law school acceptance letter from 1989, and a copy of the video that had now surpassed 10 million views. One represented the beginning. The other, a crossroad. He made his decision just before midnight. Not because of pressure. Not because of fame. But because of responsibility. The next morning, he took the bench like always. Same robe. Same courthouse. But after the last case was heard, he asked the bailiff to call a press conference. He stood at the podium, the courthouse seal behind him, and spoke with quiet conviction. I have been honored to serve this state as a judge for over 2 decades. But the events of recent weeks have shown me that justice doesn't stop at the courtroom doors. It must live in policy, in training, in leadership. That's why, after long consideration, I have decided to step down from the bench, and step forward into a new role. Gasps echoed. Reporters leaned in. I will be seeking the office of Arkansas Attorney General. The silence was electric. Judge Everett wasn't running for glory. He was running to build a system where a man like him wouldn't have to prove he belonged. Where the law would see not just what you wore, but who you were. And this time, the gavel wouldn't be the end of the story. One night, after a town hall in Jonesboro, a retired police sergeant approached him. Didn't vote for you, the man said. But I watched that video. That wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a damn alarm. Everett nodded. Then we build something better together. Meanwhile, Callahan and McGRA were quietly placed on unpaid administrative leave. Internal Affairs concluded their review, and though no criminal charges were filed, both were removed from field duty indefinitely. The campaign continued, fueled not by fury, but by focus. 1 month before the election, a televised debate was scheduled. Everett's opponent, a seasoned politician with ties to several law enforcement unions, came ready to attack. But Everett didn't take the bait. When asked about playing the victim, he replied, I'm not a victim. I'm a witness to what the system can become when power lacks accountability. And I'm here to make sure no one else has to be. By the time the debate ended, the hashtag #JusticeForAll was trending nationwide. And as early ballots began rolling in, one thing became clear, the gavel had found a new voice.